Hi everyone, konnichiwa minasan. My name is Kudeki, and I'm really excited to be here in Tokyo speaking with you and learning from all the rest of you as well. A lot of the talks so far at Try Swift have been featuring some of the really advanced language features that you've been using in your products, and I've really been enjoying learning about those. But I'm going to talk about Swift from a slightly different perspective. I'm going to tell you about my experiences with Swift in the wild and as a newcomer. I'll share the lessons I learned over the past year, which I spent picking up Swift while taking my app called VINA and our startup from pre-launch to thousands of daily users, and why Swift allowed us to stay afloat and really thrive in our first year. So my story with the company and the product called VINA begins in early 2016, so exactly a year ago. At this point, I still knew absolutely zero Swift. My friend Olivia and her co-founder have built an MVP, also known as a minimum viable product, of her app over the course of about 6 months. The idea behind the app is to make a kind of Tinder for female friendships. So dating apps are pretty common these days. However, there's no real way to meet other women just for friendship. After moving to a new city or going through life changes, something like that, where you might lose some friends. So I'm considering this idea, and I think about the last few women that I've met in San Francisco and I've become friends with. I realized that they're all the women that my existing friends had started to date. So ultimately, they came to me through a dating app as well, but it was very indirect. So I think it's a great idea. I'm really on board. And I start working with these two founders, preparing to release the MVP to the App Store. The co-founder is walking me through how she built her app. And I think she's a little bit embarrassed about the state of the code at this point. But I'm really impressed with what she's built because, first of all, it only took her 6 months. Second, it's her first iPhone app ever. And third, there's a few bugs in there, but in general, the big features work. You can swipe on people, you can match, you can send messages, you can look at people's profiles, update your own profile. In general, it's all there. So by definition, at the early stages of a startup, you're going to be building a lot of stuff from scratch and trying a lot of new things, both for you and ideally for the world. You're going to be learning a lot on the fly. And your team is probably also extremely small, in my case, 2 people, and you're responsible for a large surface area of the product, maybe even the entire thing, as was the case with the co-founder that I'm meeting. So obviously we have our core areas of expertise, and it's really good to be able to wield those to build something and feel good about that. But you also are going to need to learn a lot of new things anyway, and the idea of embracing that beginner's mindset is really helpful. For me, Swift was amongst these things that I had to learn. So a bit about how the app was built at this point. This co-founder was a full-stack engineer. Again, I said limited mobile experience. And to save time, the MVP was built on PARSE, which is a mobile backend as a service, which is owned by Facebook, which should be perfect for our use case, which is brand new, very first version of an app. All of this was new to me because my background at the time was really different. I had come from Twitter over the past few years working on their iOS app, which was written in Objective-C, kind of an older code base. It was highly organized and had around 80 regular contributors, many of them very, very experienced with iOS. So suddenly I'm in this situation where I'm a total novice at Swift, at Parse, at having so much control over a project itself, and all the other tools besides Xcode, really. But then also, I'm an expert at having released mobile apps before. So thanks to Parse and Swift, the non-expert co-founder could write and build the app quickly, and I could get up to speed contributing almost immediately. One of the first things I had to fix was our push notifications were broken. They weren't working with Parse, which provided some push notification capabilities, but I never even figured out why it wasn't working. Because we were too busy trying to get everything else to work at the time. So at first, not knowing why this was broken really frustrated me. But again, there was no one to tell you why it wasn't working and other things to really focus on. So again, as I said, Swift was concise and readable, so going through the new code base was easy and unintimidating for me. And all the classes and functions being public by default made it really easy to go throw in a fix or a new library to handle a feature and just go from there. And you can get a lot done when you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So our app at this stage was kind of a mashup of a bunch of different CocoaPods, like 20 different things, one for the swiping functionality, one for something else. And I ended up just dropping in a new CocoaPod to handle our push service and just moved on to the next thing right away. The whole experience took me maybe a couple hours to fix. So finally, we get our app ready for the App Store, and Apple approves us, hooray. And it goes really well. That morning, my CEO does a few interviews for 2 publications, and then that spirals into many, many other publications, dozens of articles, kind of all saying the same thing, which is, hey, women, now you can swipe right for friendship. So a ton of installs happened basically immediately, 100,000 in just the first 2 weeks. So clearly we're onto something here. People like our idea, and it's something that people are interested in, they want to use. This felt really good, but also really not good. Since we didn't anticipate that quantity of people downloading it, we also hadn't really prepared for it. So a popular phrase in startup land is that if you aren't embarrassed of your MVP, you waited too long. So I guess in our case, this means we did it perfectly. I do think our product was good at the time, but we learned from our mistakes right now. So one big mistake we had made is we didn't know that there was an upper bound to the number of requests per minute that PARSE allowed you to make, and that you couldn't fix this problem by paying them more money. However, of course, we found this out by passing the maximum. So what we ended up having to do is hack on a waitlist system after the fact and kind of like lock people out of the app and let them in kind of one by one so that we could limit that number of requests. So we let some people in San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, and everyone else we told they have to wait. Unfortunately, no one wants to wait in line. It's very frustrating. So we're getting a lot of one-star app reviews at this time. And that's kind of annoying, but our requests per minute are down below the limit. So our app is actually functional for the people who do have access to it, which is important. Another problem with getting all this early press was that our app spread a lot further than we expected. So people trying to use it are, for the most part, haven't used beta products before. They're not your typical Silicon Valley early adopters. So it left a lot of people frustrated trying to use it. And it was really hard for us to get bug reports that were helpful and accurate that we could translate into action items to fix. People would kind of leave us vague information like something's glitchy, and we can't figure out exactly what's happening or how to fix it. So to tackle this problem, we harnessed the power of the internet, and we started a Slack channel for enthusiastic users so we can push test flight builds directly to them and get immediate feedback. The fact that people are so passionate about our app is great, and it kind of blows my mind that people want to participate in something like this because it's kind of a pain, to get the test flight builds, try things out, and give feedback. Anyway, one day we're getting a lot of women in the Slack saying the app is crashing for them, it's crashing, and we're trying to fix it. But as you all know, if you can't reproduce the crash, it's very hard to know if you've actually fixed the problem. So we're making all these builds, and it's not going well. So eventually my CEO asks in the Slack channel if there's anyone in San Francisco who might be able to come and meet us and help out with this problem if they're experiencing the crash. So we actually get one girl who's in the Slack. She lives in San Francisco, and she doesn't have a job. It's like a Tuesday afternoon. And she comes by our office, which is a living room at this point, and we just plug in her iPhone, and my CEO distracts her with wine and conversation. And we pretty much see the problem immediately. So this is basically what's happening at the top of her card stack. So the first user she's seeing. She's trying to look this user, and we see the user doesn't have a first name. We have no idea why, but users should generally have first name. This is, you log in via Facebook, generally you have a name. Anyway, so this is how we're displaying that name in the top of the card deck. And you can see the unwrapped optional here. So the user's first name is nil, and we get a crash. Pretty basic stuff. So we're kind of left questioning why they don't have a name, but maybe because we'd gone over a request limit earlier, we're experiencing some data loss or something else weird happening. And we fix it with just a more appropriate use of optionals, making sure the name is no longer nil and avoiding the crash. As you can see with my fix here, this is from our PR. I don't even know about guard yet. I haven't learned this. We're still like a month in. After this experience, though, I learned my lesson and I go clean up a lot of the unwrapped optionals in our code. And eventually I learn about guard, very helpful. And I learn about the default syntax for switch, which doesn't do the fall through, which eliminates some really common bugs. And as time goes on, I go through and convert things to proper types, because coming from parse, it kind of gives you all your data as a bunch of like any objects or strings, and that's not super helpful in guarding for these issues that could come up. So obviously these are all really Swift 101 basic features. I'm sure a lot of you know all of them, but I'm starting to see them in action and gain appreciation for how Swift is actually making it harder for me to make mistakes. I'm getting an intuition about this safety that a lot of the speakers yesterday were telling you more in depth about. And this is super important because, again, our team is 2 people. A lot of times I'm merging my own code and no one is looking over it. And we're mainly able to avoid the crashes and make the app at least a lot more stable, which is that first base level of frustration that we can eliminate for people. Extensions also make it really easy to improve the code base. For example, we're noticing now that there's a lot of places where we take a rectangular or square image and crop the profile picture to a circle. So we just take a few minutes, write an extension of UI view that can apply this rounding, and then start using it everywhere. So the key here is that we're able to improve our code base with each new feature of our app and each new Swift feature that we learn. So as we gain skills, we're naturally refining our app and reducing the tech debt as we go, instead of having to tackle it all at once. We're going back to the startup life cycle for a little bit. We've now completed our seed round of funding, hooray, and at this stage, you're building really fast, seeing if people like your idea, lots of new features. In my opinion, it's not really even cost effective to write really good code at this stage, and again, I'm still learning, so every time I learn something new, the next feature is written like slightly less badly than the previous one. And it would have definitely not been worth it to write the initial code well, because as we find out at this point, we have to get rid of pretty much all of it. Okay, so remember when we launched back in January? The same day, Parse announced they were shutting down their entire service. A very upsetting moment. And that everyone has 1 year to migrate their apps to a different backend. So 1 year is pretty good, not too stressful, but it's still immediate tech debt right out of the gate. And since our app involves a lot of user-to-user interaction, it's not just reading data, we had to build a new backend, but we also needed to make sure that when we migrate people, we migrate kind of everyone together. The reason for this is because if user A is swiping on user B, maybe they get a match, and it could be written to one system or the other, but not both. That's not good. And if we write to both, then one of them, they both have to be in sync, otherwise one of them is correct and one of them is incorrect. So it kind of gets messy very quickly, and we just decided it would be simplest to get everyone from old to new pretty much as quickly as possible. So we planned for a short downtime window of a couple of hours, and we're trying to make this happen. So the version of the app that needs to be in the App Store at this time has to do 3 things for us. 1, it has to be able to connect to both Parse and the new backend. 2, it has to be able to start out on the old system and make like a one-way migration to the new one. It doesn't have to go back and forth, just old to new. And 3, it has to lock the user out during the downtime window, which isn't too complicated. But the challenges here were basically for 2 reasons. First of all, we had no API-specific area of our code because Parse kind of lets you get away with not doing that at all. It makes it very easy to modify model objects in line, and there's no networking section of our API to interface with and replace with new methods. So here you might see how you create a report about a user with Parse, if like you want to report someone, they've been, acting poorly. And this could live anywhere in the app. Probably in this case, it's in a view controller. So that's not very clean. And as we're building the new code to talk to both Parse and the new backend, slowly the app is morphing into a giant if-else block like this. It's very ugly. So we started to refactor, and there are three main ways that we separate the logic from old and new. The first was very basic, just copy and paste the entire file and put the new stuff in the new one, meaning we have two versions of the code, right? So here we have a Facebook graph request, which handles Facebook login and what to do with the results. The login view controller would own one of each of these. So it has a var for a Facebook graph request and a parse Facebook graph request, and it knows which one to use based on the state and uses the relevant one to log in the user. It also means that when we go back to clean up the parse code later, it's really easy. You just go and delete the file name that says parse in it, and then clean up whatever the compiler yells at you about. So super, super simple. The second way we did this was just creating different versions of a function, which is pretty nice in view controllers because you might have like slightly different setup logic or differently structured data depending on which backend. But this one was pretty messy to detangle, and I don't know, it was very easy to miss something, like do setup in only one but not the other and just leave things out. And the third way, which was the most satisfying for me as an engineer, was to separate the logic and build a protocol to handle the model objects that have different data between the old and new. So in this example, we create a protocol that allows you to display a location, and the user has a location from Facebook. It might have a neighborhood, and then maybe flags for whether we show it or not, just a bunch of different info that might be used to display a location screen like this in our app. And now we don't care about what the data source is. We make sure the old and the new type of location satisfy the protocol, and you're basically done. This third strategy takes the most extra time, but it's totally worth it because, again, the code base is better than when you started. It's really easy to extract later, and you just delete the parse location in this example. But you leave the protocol there because it's actually a very helpful abstraction. It's also good because it documents the intent of your code, like protocols often do. We know we want to display a location, and whether or not there's two different models or just one behind the scenes doesn't really matter for us. It's kind of a more Swifty way to do things as well. So, of course, this refactor is still a bit of a pain, but it's not difficult to do, and it's not difficult to do accurately, which is important. And it really helped this whole project go smoothly. So far I've highlighted like all the great things about using Swift in this first 6 months with all these rewrites. And it's important to mention that not everything was like super easy. Obviously, having so many dependencies with all these CocoaPods adds a lot of complexity. And especially when migrating your project between Swift language versions, which happens pretty frequently, as you know. And of course, you do run into bugs when you're writing all this code so fast and no one's checking you. Additionally, I think we would have a really different story if we had an existing app or a larger code base that we were trying to move from Objective-C to Swift. But that was not our situation. And at this stage of our company, I think the downsides were really pretty manageable compared to the benefits. So this all happened within the first 6 months on the App Store, which were by far the most volatile and kind of scary. In that time, we solved all these major roadblocks. We made the app a lot more usable and improved our code quality and refactored pretty much every piece of our app at least once. Picking up Swift along the way was a really nice bonus, and all of this was really doable because Swift is designed to have a really quick learning curve. So the non-expert could build the working app in weeks or months, and the new team member, me, could quickly dive in and start contributing immediately. As we've covered, Swift catches your mistakes for you, saving you some debugging later. and allowing your team to stay really lean, which is important early on. And it's really easy to improve your code base as you go when you learn something new or find a better way to extract some logic into appropriate places. So that means you get to spend the bulk of your time on what's really important. At the early stage of our company, those are things like solidifying your product, building a bunch of new features, studying your users, analytics, all of that, and thinking about growth and figuring out what it takes to get your app to the next level. Right now, the problems we're focusing on are way more interesting than, just migrating our backend. And they're kind of the meaty questions of what makes our app valuable to people in the first place and what makes it sustainable. And we got to this really interesting stage a lot more quickly than I expected. So if you're new to Swift and thinking of starting a new project or an app or a company, I encourage you to start building quickly, see what happens, stay open to changes, and start building in Swift. Thank you.
非常に興味深く聞かせていただきました。ありがとうございました。二つ質問をしたいんですが、一つは、今後スタートアップとして新しい、アプリを作る場合でも、もうなくなってしまったんですけれども、PARSE.com や、モバイルのバックエンドサービスを、積極的に使っていった方がいいかどうか、ということをお聞きしたいです。で、もう一つは、PARSE.com から移行された際に、コードベースを分けて、独自に、別の、インフラに書き込むようにしたということだったんですけれども、互換、オープンソースのPARSEサーバーもあって、で、それを立てて、そのままそっちに、移行するという選択肢もあったかなと思うんですけども、そうされなかった理由をお聞かせいただければなと思います。
So this was kind of limited by who we had on the team at the time. Yes, we could have moved to a very similar service, but we felt a little bit burned by what had happened to us already, and we kind of wanted to make something where we felt we were in full control. So at the time, the co-founder, CTO, was very familiar with the Rails backend, so she wanted to move to that. And that made sense. It was something we could do quickly, and we knew we could do it effectively as well. So I think you should take into consideration what other technologies are out there, of course, and what might be simplest, but also what the skills of your team are, especially at such an early stage where each person is so important.
Thank you. ありがとうございました。